All right, gentlemen, I am back after a bit of a delay. Sorry, I had some problems. I am going to, hold on. I'm going to go over that hand that you guys sent me the other day. Um, and there was another hand that I was going to do a while ago that I never did. So if somebody can repost it, I posted that in the chat before, but I had a phone problem. So I like deleted all my memory, then reinstalled, whatever it was, so it got lost. So just a link to that other hand if you guys want me to review it. Here's an interesting hand. I have to tell you, I don't think it was played well anywhere around. And it's kind of fun for me though, because I don't know what Max had in this hand. So let's go through the hand here and see from the perspective of Zeev and Max what I think. Okay, one thing I always note before we even deal hands is we're playing a relatively deepish stacked, where Zeev is like 106 big blinds deep and Max has him covered. So we're playing roughly 106 big blinds deep effectively. The reason I keep saying this, by the way, is because, when you know how many big blinds you guys each have, you know how to play future streets and in terms of increasing the pot, the pot size for value for a later street, to set up bigger bets later on, or in terms of like the efficacy of playing certain drawing hands, where you need 20 to 1 odds or 10 to 1 odds or 8 to 1 odds to play. So here, when you're playing 106 big blinds deep, you get those hands. You get that value. In any case, let's see the hand. Okay, the only thing we know right now is that Zeev has ace-6 of ace-6 suited. All right, DP first. DP limps in. Now, again, in weak games, you'll see a lot of guys limping in early, but in general, from early position, unless I'm doing a secret little trap with a big hand where I plan to re-raise when I get raised, from early position, I'm never limping in, as a general rule. And if you factor in the traps that I'll sometimes lay, that's the only time that I'll limp in, or maybe with like an ace king kind of hand if I want to balance that. But that's more advanced than this. Alec folds, Zeev. I like Zeev raising up here. You're in the cutoff. Ace-6 rates to be a good hand, and if you raise, you can get Gavi out of the hand, hopefully, meaning that you'd have position for the rest of the hand. I don't like the raise size, however. 60 if nobody had limped in is maybe acceptable. When somebody limps in, you have to do at least 80. And honestly, if you're in a game with a lot of sticky players, a lot of calling stations, which this game should have, if I'm not mistaken, I would even look a little bit bigger, 100, 110, something like that. With your goal then being A, to secure position, because it makes it much harder for Gavi to call. And B, it allows you either to take down a pot of 70 instantly, which is not bad, or be in position hopefully against only one player. So that would be my goal. So though I like the instinct to raise, I think 60 is definitely small here. I would do minimum 80, meaning 60 plus another 20 for every limper in the pot. That's a general rule. But in a game like this, I'd probably do minimum 100, maybe even 105, 110. That's what I'd be looking. Okay, Gavi now. Gavi calls at a 3x raise. Gavi's incentivized now in position, to call with a lot of hands he might not have called otherwise with. A lot of drawing hands, even unsuited connectors. 10-9 offsuit. So Gavi's incentivized with such a small bet to call with a wider range where he's going to be in position. Max also over here. Max also over here. He has an option even if he's got a decent hand, to 3-bet big and put pressure on you guys, maybe take down the entire pot now because there's already, 160, 120, 130, there's already $150 in the middle. So meaning, Max could even consider putting out a bet of like, it depends on his hand, Max. Not that you can always do this, but if you have the right hand that, this might not be a bad spot to put in a re-raise to something like 255, 260. Thin the crowd out, only going heads up if somebody calls you, but likely really good chance getting a lot of folds. And honestly, in this situation, it's even an ace-6 suited, certainly should be considering a fold. Again, if you're a wilder player, he might not be folding it, but in general, that's a hand that most people do fold to. As is what is a good hand to 3-bet, by the way? Really, it's a hand that would have interesting equity after the fact. That'd be like suited connectors, like 9-10 suited, 10, Jack 9 suited, something like that. Or a hand with good blockers, like a king queen, would actually be a good place to 3-bet here. Because if you're holding king queen, a lot of the hands that might 4-bet you don't, you block a lot of them from happening. There are far fewer pocket kings, pocket queens, ace king, and ace queens that are out there if you have a hand like king queen or king jack even. So as a pure bluff with some equity after the fact, you may want to consider 3-betting here with one of those hands. But as played, and given the table you're at, I'm assuming that this is going to be a call for you with a wide range of hands. I would be throwing away my junk, but I'd be calling with all suited connectors, all suited 1-gappers, so even 10-8, 9-7, 8-6, stuff like that. All pocket pairs I'd be calling, all paint cards, even offsuit I'd be calling. I don't know about that. Of all those hands we just mentioned, I think about pocket paint cards are probably weaker for you. Hands like ace-10, ace-9, ace-jack, ace-7, those kinds of hands, king 8, king-7. And the reason why is because you're in the worst position after the flop. So if you're just calling, you don't want to call with a hand that could be dominated. You don't want to call with a hand like like ace-9 that could end up hitting an ace, but being behind a stronger ace with 4 people to act after you. So you actually over here would want to be calling with a lot more drawing hands if you're just calling, which I assume you are. Drawing hands are hands that can make straights, hands that can make sets, hands that can make flushes, things like that. So with that, you could be calling, which I assume you do. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about this hand. Yes, you do. And Josh folds, and DP completes. And we have $260 in the pot with a flop. Now, the reason why you have to look at the number of dollars in the pot with a flop is because if anybody has a big hand, you may want to consider ways to play for stacks. So meaning, Zeev, if you flop a big hand here, you might be thinking about down betting, something like 100, 105. Well, it actually depends on the hand. I don't want to get further than that. So just consider that. Just be aware that there's $260 in the pot, and there's still 2006 effective that you're playing for. And I say effective, that's because that's what Zeev has. So that's what Max is playing for, because the other 400 is not in the game there. All right. Flop comes interesting. This is not a board that favors Zeev's raising range, right? That's the first thing. So Zeev, well, let's look at the positive first. Zeev, we know your cards. You flopped bottom pair, top kicker. That's something with a backdoor flush draw. So you flopped a little something, but you raised. So the range of hands that you're on is lots of high cards. And the range of hands that everybody else called with, includes a lot of queen 10s, 10-8s, ace jacks, jack 9s. So meaning, so this flop favors a caller's range more than it does a raiser's range. So even though you hit something, Zeev, I would be skeptical here. From Max's position, Max, you're first to act. You should be checking this, I think, 100% of the time. I'm thinking out loud here. If you miss, of course, you should be checking this. This is not a place to bluff when you're first to act with 4 people. If you hit something moderate, like Jack 8, Jack 10, 9-8, which gives you a middle pair with a backdoor straight draw, you should still be checking because a bet is likely to get very few folds behind 3 people. So if you hit a moderate something, you should really be check calling here. You don't have much fold equity. Maybe you get to see a free card even. So I don't like betting with moderate equity. If you have a great draw here, queen 10 with a club, queen 10 with a straight, or even just plain queen 10, but especially if you have a backdoor draw, queen 10 of spades, not with ace spade, with both spades, or even here I wouldn't be betting. I would consider check raising because this favors your range. So, I mean, this could be a hand where I check, and if Zeev continues or somebody else bets, and you can check raise and put a lot of pressure on them with a range that favors your cards more than his. But this should be a check all the way through. I'm thinking very big draw. You could be considering check raise. A big hand, you definitely don't want to bet because you want to allow the pre-flop better to continue betting. And a moderately made hand, you're definitely not. Yeah, so this should be a check all the way around. which it is not. Okay, so now I'm really curious because Max bet's really small, 60 into a pot of 260. Very small bet. It almost feels like a blocker. Like, oh, I've got like, like an ace nine, a jack eight, something very, very moderate. And honestly, like if you're trying to induce a raise, if I'm Gavi here and DP and Zeev just call, I may consider raising with any sort of backdoor equity or any sort of single pair because the reason why, I'm thinking from Gavi's perspective is if you simply do this bet, it looks kind of one pairy weaky, maybe it's not. But if DP calls and Zeev call, they're both saying they don't have enough to raise just yet. So they're indicating some strength, but not a ton of strength. So those two kinds of hands, some strength, but not a ton of strength, are very likely to fold to a big bet. And so from Gavi's perspective, he sees apparent weakness and then a call with more apparent weakness. There would then be something like $440 in the middle of the pot. And, Gavi could then bang it up to like, he can bang it up to like a bet of something like a pot size bet, like 440, 400, something like that, and have a realistic chance of taking it all down. I think more than half the time, I bet that size would take the pot down. So I'm thinking from those perspectives. Z, from your perspective, you can call here if Gavi's a passive player. Meaning if Gavi's an active thinking player, if I'm on the button, you have to fold this. Now, you don't have to fold this, but you want to consider folding it because I'm very likely to put pressure on other people on that button. But if it's a passive player behind you, then Zeev, there's such a small bet into the pot. You can call. You have a lot of backdoor equity. You have bottom pair, but any six, any ace, any spade dramatically improves your hand and likely makes you best. Against the majority of the other ranges out there. So I would probably be leaning towards calling here also, depending on, the kind of player Gavi is. Let's see. DP folds, Zeev calls, yep, and Gavi calls. Zeev, Max, I wonder what you have. And Zeev, I wonder if you would have called if the bet was larger. Probably not. And I wonder if you would have continuation bet if it was checked to you. I hope not, but I suspect perhaps so. On this board, it's not one they want to see bet, especially five ways. But okay, any case. So Zeev and Gavi call. We're going three ways to the flop, to the turn with $440 in the middle, and you guys have 2,000 effective still behind you. So there's still plenty of pot to go. All right. River's an interesting card. The three shouldn't pair up with much of anybody's range. Max is unlikely to have pocket threes or any hand that has a six here. Maybe 6-3, but really no, because Zeev is blocking the six. With the six of spades, you're blocking that. So I'm assuming if it's 6-3, it'll be a 6-3 suited. 6-3 offsuit makes no sense at all. 6-3 of diamonds can't happen because the six of diamonds on the board, three of spades is on the board. So that's the only pair. There's no jack threes or 9-3s that Max realistically has or that Gavi realistically has. And pocket threes doesn't realistically call that flop either, or bet that flop. So the three really makes no difference to anybody. The fourth spade makes a difference because it gives Zeev a straight draw. There is an outside chance that Max led with a hand like 7-8 of spades, 10-8 of spades, queen 10 of spades, where he had like a really nice combo draw. Where he had a straight draw, but also, a backdoor flush draw. So there are a couple backdoor flush draws that Zeev that you beat that perhaps could be out there. But right now, I don't know, Max, what you have. I don't know what you could be betting before. Nothing made sense before. But at this point, with this turn card, once you've begun telling the story, and I don't like the story you're telling, but once you've begun telling the story, I would probably continue that story. At this point, although I don't like it out of position. But with 440 in the pot, I'd like to see a nice size bet, something like 280 to 320, something that can chase people off. Now, of course, Zeev is not going anywhere to that bet with this nut flush draw, but you don't know that. And there's not a lot of flush draws. Zeev there are a lot of other hands that Zeev could have that don't include the nut flush that would fold to a nice size bet. So just because it wouldn't work here doesn't mean it's not the right play. Let's see. Max, okay, Max does continue to bet, but bets incredibly small. Now, when you see bets that are shrinking in size, especially in and even in relative size, so meaning before Max bet about a quarter pot, I think, or a third pot, now Max bets about 1/10 pot. So that doesn't that incentivizes you to call with any pair, even if you didn't with ace-6, even if you weren't suited, you'd be incentivized to call with those pot odds. But especially with a flush draw, honestly, with such a small bet, I might even be raising here, especially against the sticky opponent. We know Max gets curious sometimes, so I'd be raising, maybe ahead, probably not ahead of him right now, but you may be. But the reason why, one of the reasons why you raise is because you can get a fold potentially, and even if you don't get a fold, any spade, any ace, any 6 gives you the likely best hand. Where if you raised and he called, the pot would be larger, something around 1,000 potentially, and then you'd have 1,500 left, and you can potentially play for stacks or for a much bigger river. So as a setup for that, Zeev, once he bets small, Max, I'd be betting much larger. Zeev, once you're facing a small bet, you're definitely not going away. And calling is okay to realize your equity here, but just the story that Max is telling, a small bet on the flop and a smaller yet bet on the turn, that would, especially with your backdoor draws. So even if he's slow playing like some sort of overpair, or pocket pair, or even a set, sometimes I'll have a set and you'll be just be beaten, or you'll be behind, but you're ahead so often and you could put so much pressure so often. I would be raising here. And Gavi hasn't indicated any strength. So if Gavi has anything to speak of, he would probably speak up right here. And with a re-raise. Let's see. Gavi does speak up with a re-raise, but it's a $40 re-raise. What is going on with you people? Nobody's leaving for $40 in a pot this size at this point. So Gavi is saying he's got something. I don't know that he's betting with a straight. That's a more sophisticated play, with a straight draw rather. So Gavi's probably saying he's got something ranging from ace jack, to 7, 8, not even to ace jack, from to 9 to jack 9. I don't even know. But Gavi's saying he's got a little something, but he's saying it the wrong way with a little tiny bet, because that's not incentivizing anybody to stay out there. Max, we saw calls for his 80. Zeev, again, me. Well, now you can't really drop the hammer, because Gavi, his min raise, what does it mean? I'd be confused. So now at this point, having seen Gavi min raise, I would probably just call and realize my equity, but it is, I would be tempted to re-raise. But in any case, all right, 680 in the pot. That means we're not playing for stacks in all likelihood. All right, river comes a great card for Zeev. With 680 in the pot, so now there's no way that we're going to be playing for stacks, because that's literally, the pot is a third of the smallest stack here. I didn't realize this is a 3-way hand to the river. The Gavi would still be here. Now Zeev is definitely sitting with the nuts. Max, from your perspective, you don't know. Zeev, of course, has, flushes in his range, but because they came backdoor with runner, turn, river, you can't really, you probably have Zeev's range, especially because he raised pre-flop, rated to, a big jack, ace jack, king jack, an overpair, pocket queens, pocket kings, pocket aces, but I feel like people tend to play pocket aces differently at these levels. So even though, you'd be behind here, a lot of the range that, even though you are behind here, a lot of the range that Zeev has, I may lead out here. The problem, it depends what you have. If you have here a hand like ace jack, 2-pair even, 2-pair is not a great hand anymore, because every straight draw came in, every flush draw, the flush draw came in. Actually, not every straight draw, and 7-8 did not come in. But 10-8 came, 10-8 has equity. But queen 10 came in. I guess, so some straight draws came in. Let me say that more accurately. Some straight draws came in, and every flush draw came in. So because of that, if you have a monster, a set, a weaker flush, which is unlikely but possible, then I would probably bet. Of course, folding when Zeev 3-bet me, because Zeev's only 3-betting me with hands that beat me. But if you have a hand like top pair, or or two pair even. At this point, those are weaker relative hands. So my plan would be to check call probably over here. So I'd be checking this with the expectation to call, any reasonable size bet from Ziv, so anywhere between 200 and 500. So let's see what you do. Okay, now you lead out with a decent size. I don't know what's going on here. Does this mean that you made a straight? Does this mean you made a flush? I don't like betting here unless you have like a second nutted kind of hand, like king high flush. King high flush you can do this with because Ziv has what he actually has so rarely that you can do this with it, king high flush, opening a call by something weaker. Other than that though, I don't know what you can be doing. A straight, the flushes came in, so a straight I wouldn't be betting so big here. I think this is a mistake. I think the check call is the way to play here. Because the only thing that's really calling you now from Ziv and Gavi are weaker hands. Sorry, the only thing that's calling you now are hands that beat you. Ace, ace, high flush when Ziv has calls, king high flush calls. I don't think straights would call even here necessarily. Although that did come backdoor. Yeah, I think maybe you get some calls from straights. I think you get some calls from straights. So if you happen to have like a nice flush or a nut straight, then yeah, I guess I can get behind this bet. And then you have to fold to any re-raise, obviously. But if you have a hand like two pair, single pair, set, anything like that, I don't like betting here at all. You would lose some money here. I would check and then let Ziv, bet, because Ziv, what happens if you bet, Ziv is only calling with hands that beat you. However, if you check, Ziv may turn some hands that you beat, depending on what you have, into bluffs. Ziv could have a straight that you may beat, with a better straight. Ziv could have a top pair. The truth is king, queen is totally within Ziv's raising range. So Ziv really could have a straight here. So if you have a better straight or if you have a flush, you could be calling with that. Even if you have a set, maybe Ziv can get creative, with a top pair or two pair. So I really like checking. It allows Ziv's range to include some hands that you beat potentially. I'm not crazy about this bet at all. Ziv, I assume is raising. He does raise, and he raises small. That actually could work. It depends. Ziv, I'm curious your take on this. If you think that Max, I think Max may actually have something here. So if you think that Max actually has something here, then I would be raising this bigger because then you can get Max to call more and give you more money. Max, unless you have something better, unless you have at this point, Max, I'd be letting go even a king high flush. But Ziv, you don't know that at this point, so I would be raising bigger, with probably 1,000 a pot now, with between his 340 raise and the 680 in the middle. I'd probably be raising this closer to 900, 950. And if Max has a strong enough hand to call, then he's going to call anyway, and you make more money. Gavi, I assume, lets go now because the only hands that really fit him raising bigger now are blocked by Ziv's ace of spades. So I assume Gavi lets go and Max folds or Max calls. Yeah, I was scared of that. And Max calls, pays off the river. I remember him saying that in the chat, actually they paid off the river. Yeah, definitely shouldn't have paid off the river. I'm really curious, Max, what you had. And I probably rambled a little too much on this call. I apologize, but it was an interesting hand. Hope this helped. Be good, gentlemen. Now comes the time where you have to wait as I try to remember how to stop the recording.